That was a really long series of accolades and awards and all kinds of things. And I really have no idea why I'm with all these amazing women. I mean, I don't even know if I'm going to say the right thing. And I really have no idea if I even have the right questions. I'm always surprised at why I'm picked for these kind of positions because it's just, at some point, somebody's going to realize that I'm just an imposter in this role. And to start our conversation, this is exactly what the imposter syndrome starts like in our own heads. And we perpetuate our limiting beliefs and we aim to keep ourselves small. And this conversation with these lovely women who are working tirelessly in their fields and have really sort of overcome their own sort of imposter journeys is going to be a fantastic sort of highlight to all the things that we're trying to do empowering up women, not only in the workplace, but also in their lives. So I'm very excited to have you all with us and very happy that a lot of people are streaming in because this is a very important conversation, not only in our personal lives, but in the lives of the people that we lead. So I want to start with also highlighting that this powerhouse panel will not only talk about it from a clinical point of view, but will also bear testimony to how they went through it and how they overcame it. So we would love your questions because we've gone to the other side of the imposter syndrome. Uh, of course, anything with mental health is a journey and, we'll always jump back in it, but we have skills and we probably learned over a period of time. So I'm going to take it first to Monisha, who is uh, got all the clinical definitions that we need for this particular panel. So Monisha, over to you. You know, what is the clinical definition and of the syndrome, and really just put it in terms that people recognize the language behind what the imposter syndrome really is.
Thank you, Prakriti. I think you did a great introduction and covered the definition in the way you very, cleverly spoke about what imposter syndrome could be. So in 1978, uh, famous psychologists, Dr. Pauline and Dr. Suzanne, they came up with this term after researching high achieving women. And they were surprised to find that these high achieving women who were extremely talented, who were extremely competent, who were extremely hardworking, often genuinely felt within themselves that they don't deserve it, that they're not good enough. And all the success and achievement they've received is because of some external factors such as luck, or, their bosses have been fooled, or some external situation that was far beyond their control created this reality for them. And so, the simple clinical definition for imposter syndrome is when a person believes that they're being phony, they're being intellectually inauthentic, that they're just fooling everybody around them. And this feeling is very subconscious. It's not often a very conscious feeling. It's often subconscious. And this feeling creates a cycle where this person works extremely hard and this person overperforms. But this person feels they have to prove their worth to everybody. And often these feelings are caused by family dynamics, early childhood, and societal perceptions of gender roles. And as they grow up, there's also a tendency to self stereotype based on the gender roles and the messages received by society. So, somewhere as adults, these women are constantly trying to prove themselves, believing that they're not good enough and, they're just here by sheer luck. The good news is that we can use this phenomenon to our advantage and to our weapon. It doesn't have to be like a self-destructive phenomenon, and we will talk more in this session on how we can channel it to our benefit.
Thank you so much. That was really succinctly put. In terms of, what we've seen in terms of minorities constantly facing this, I think my next question is for Sunita. It would be great if you could kind of share your personal journey with not only the imposter syndrome, but all the kind of feelings that that came prior to even gaining insight into this syndrome.
Yeah, thank you, Prakriti. And Aditya, that was a wonderful introduction to all of us, and looking forward to this with Monisha and Spoorthy. It's been my career has spanned for 22 years, and I wouldn't say that I've never faced imposter syndrome. It just keeps coming, going, and going. And like Monisha very aptly described, it is very common. It's also, there are various factors, and the correct definition in terms of self-doubt, etc., and how it manifests. Now, very early in my career, just after I had come back to work post-maternity, I actually got a wonderful opportunity to lead a really large program. And the reason I got the opportunity was because I was capable of really leading it. But at that point of time, I declined after thinking about it, because one, I was really overwhelmed, and there was this little voice telling me that I was not good enough for this huge gig, couldn't have multitasks, etc. Now, you see that when you face imposter syndrome, you actually have difficulty attributing the accomplishment to your ability, in the sense that this was offered to me because I was able to do it. And then you tend to take something which is a much lesser capable role. And I passed this opportunity to a male colleague who finally took on the role. I ended up reporting to him, only to realize that I could have done this much better myself and could have managed everything. So at that inflection point, I kept thinking about what could have been different. And one of the things was, if I had someone who had sat me down at that moment and said, don't listen to your inner voice, you can do it, go for it, I think I would have made that plunge. But I also wanted to relate to an incident that happened much later, because many years later, in a global team, suddenly I had a new set of peers, and they were all, I was already doing the job, and the peers who were joining were all of a certain profile. They looked a certain way. They had come from a certain industry, and I started to conform to the belief that the job that I was doing, I was no longer suited for this, and somebody with that kind of stereotype who were getting hired were much better. And you will see that by default, when you're trying to fit into a team because you are a minority and the rest are a majority, your imposter syndrome again takes over. And the way it manifested for me, it was, I was being too hard on myself. I was in a constant state of anxiety. I was trying too hard to please. But because the two incidents and many other small incidents had happened over time, I think I had built a little more resilience to save myself from the trap. So I changed the focus to stop listening to my inner voice, or coaching my inner voice to be more positive. I stopped comparing myself to my peers. I also created a cabinet of trusted advocates, and that kept me going. So I think it's a journey, and it'll keep coming back and keep going, and you constantly have to keep working on it, but you get better at it as time progresses.
Great skills. You picked up some great skills and utilized a complete range of people who could assist you, which is fantastic. And this is like one of the things that we talk about in mental health. You know, the more you talk about the things that that are vulnerable and make you vulnerable, the stronger you become. So that's a great story. I wanted to go on to Spoorthy, and we've had a conversation before. And Spoorthy runs this fantastic company, is the CEO, and she's been, through her journey, really in competition with Ivy Leaguers, etc., and obviously has her own sort of bias against herself. So I would really like to see how you navigated your own story in your head, and really shown through your spirit to the job that you are now in.
Thanks, Prakriti. And I mean, I kind of got more insights actually in the last 5 to 10 minutes on this whole imposter syndrome. And while I may say that, I may not exactly conform to the entire definition of it, but I guess for me, imposter syndrome is strongly connected to self-doubt. And I will not shy away from saying I had it in abundance. And like Sunita said, it just keeps coming and going, depending on the situation or the challenge that you are in. For me, I'll just break this question into two parts. One, how it influenced me or impacted me, and maybe how I overcame it, So the Sorry, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing is that, by nature, intrinsically, I was somebody who would, who would panic, have anxieties, and who would worry, who would overthink. So that was my nature. And then coupled with that, there was also an organizational, stereotype or bias, you may call it, that a person from a reputed management institute can do everything better than the rest of us. That almost disabled me. And to think of it, I allowed this belief to almost influence my actions, and that mindset kind of self-limited me in a lot of ways. And I shied away from speaking in review meetings. I shied away, even if I had a great thought, I would worry about how am I going to articulate this, and am I going to make sense in front of the rest? So is it better to just keep shut? And I would probably not share a lot of good ideas that I had. And, I even when I got recognized, it's not to say that I didn't get my recognitions or I didn't get my dues. When I got recognized also, I would think that I made the cut probably because they were a little lenient towards me, or, the benchmark was low. In fact, even for promotions, I would meet my targets, but yet I would never go forward and ask for a promotion. I would actually, even when I get a promotion, of course, I'd be happy about it. But at some point, I would start wondering if, I'm completely ready for this role. Even if I met probably 75% of the requirement, I would still keep worrying about the balance 25%, which I could very easily learn on the job. And I think that is, again, a female trait that we have, that we want to fit in, or we want to kind of take mark on all competencies before we apply for something. And, some traits, as I said, were intrinsic, and some got solidified by the external biases that were there around. And I kind of, I probably allowed it to suppress my ambitions at that point in time. But yes, there's a journey on how I overcame it, and I could share it if time permits, and that's how it is with me. But I think I kind of made a good stride from where I was to where I am.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Monisha, I know I don't want you to answer this right now, but self-doubt and imposter syndrome, I know in studies that are out there, they don't link the two in a lot of places, and I want to highlight that at some point, because it's important for people to understand that self-doubt can operate on its own independently as well, and we'll get to that. But let's work on like your private practice. In your private practice, you must see people who have got this experience in their life. What would be some of the telltale signs, and what could really mitigate the negative impact of the imposter syndrome? Like, how do you work with them? What kind of therapies does one really use when we see this in the people that we nurture?
So you're right. Research says that self-doubt and imposter syndrome don't necessarily go hand in hand. In fact, I also want to differentiate between the imposter syndrome and insecurity. Insecurity is often experienced by people who are genuinely not, performing well or not good enough. But the imposter syndrome is experienced by people who are excellent at what they do. So this is an important difference we need to keep in mind. So it's not insecurity and self-doubt as is. It's much, much more complex than that. Now, what are some telltale signs is when somebody gives you a compliment, you struggle to accept it. And even if you do very embarrassingly and awkwardly accept it, deep down, you don't believe that's true. They're just faking it, or they're just saying it for the sake of it. Another symptom is not being able to express your true opinions and your true feelings. You're in a meeting and everybody is sharing an opinion and you feel compelled to go with it, even though you know that you're popular, that your opinion, even though unpopular, is excellent, but you don't believe in it. You don't believe in yourself. And so there tends to be this intellectual authenticity. So that's another telltale sign. And this person is extremely aware. They know that, they're not being intellectually authentic, which only reinforces their feelings of inferiority. And this goes on into a cycle. Another telltale sign could be a need to please, a need to be charming, a need to, um, you know, um, somehow let the other person know you're with them. And, a struggle to say no, a struggle to be assertive, a struggle to express your genuine thoughts and opinions about something. Another telltale sign is perfectionism. Someone who is extremely particular about being perfect all the time and is very hard on themselves, very critical on themselves, and doesn't accept anything less than perfection. Now, of course, we know that perfection is unrealistic, but this again creates a cycle because I set unrealistic expectations on myself. I rarely meet them, and therefore I feel I'm not good enough. And I feel that eventually somebody is going to figure out that, this is my reality. And it only goes on and on. So, what are some ways to break this cycle? First is self awareness and really understanding what is reality, what is real, and what is not. So, in therapy, we would work a lot with cognitive behavior therapy, working with the thoughts and beliefs that is causing these symptoms. Because another sign is also generalized anxiety. This person would have a tendency for generalized anxiety, sometimes depression, sometimes frustration. Um, and so, working with specific beliefs, specific thoughts that are creating these emotions, going back to the childhood, going back to family dynamics that have created, that can be a game changer, that can be really powerful. Another practical thing that I use in therapy with these amazing women who think they're, you know, uh, not good enough. Another thing is that these women think that everybody else is better than them. Like Spoorthy was rightly sharing, there's a tendency that I have to work double hard. Everybody else doesn't have to work this hard because they're just naturally better than me. So at its core, imposter syndrome is a social anxiety, phenomenon. So one thing that I found really practical is to help the person reward effort and not outcome. Often what happens is with this person is outcome driven and equates their sense of self-worth with outcome. And so we remove the outcome from the picture and just look at effort. If we can just appreciate effort and reward effort, that can again be another game changer. Because this person is extremely hardworking, is putting all the effort. And so to realize that these are self-defeating beliefs that we are carrying and to hold on to that voice and to even name the imposter within. So what I do in therapy is to say, okay, if you have to name this voice who keeps telling you, you're not good enough and everyone is going to find out and everyone's better than you, give it a name. Let's make friends with it. Don't treat it as your enemy. Let's make it your radical hero. Let's make it work for you instead of making it work against you. So these are some practical ways we can work with this phenomenon in therapy.
That's great. I love the points. I mean, you highlighted definitely that there was a lot of inputs in your childhood that actually led to this. You also, have highlighted that you can transform the voice, which is amazing because that's really the key of all cognitive behavior therapy. I think one of the aspects that I would like to talk about, and I'd like Sunita to take this forward, is really, something that Monisha just mentioned is really talking about how do you honor effort over honoring a result. I wonder how that would play out in the workplace. And I know we're off piece, but this is like a really interesting one. I mean, how would how do you think it would change the way in which people work as well to be able to start sort of impacting impacting pressure on the effort versus pressure on the results, in terms of just even if you take it personally, how would that have helped you navigate your journey in the corporate world?
So, Prakriti, actually, there were a couple of great points that Monisha made, and I was making notes as she was talking. I think one of the things that you mentioned, this really manifests maybe as a part of the early childhood conditioning, and what it then stores in your head is the fear of failure, and usually comes up in women because there is this whole stereotypical, you have to behave a certain way, like humility, for example. Humility is one of the biggest enemy of imposter syndrome. So when you were talking about this, and there is an interesting experiment that Google did, in that is to what Spoorthy had mentioned earlier. With the engineering team, we asked people to self-nominate, and most of the time the male population engineers would self-nominate themselves for promotion compared to the female. And this mostly manifested because women felt that they had not reached 100% of the skill to get into that job, whereas men, when they were at about 70, thought they were already ready for the job, even if they were at 50. So this really then got us to thinking, how do you do perf management? How do you change the focus to effort than to outcome? And how that worked is, people were not ready to take on large projects because there was always this fear of, oh, you know what, my perf happens in 6 months, my appraisal happens in 6 months, I will not finish the project, the impact will not be seen, and hence I will not get the benefit. So the moment we change the focus to saying, in the period when we do the performance appraisal, we will not focus on the impact if the impact hasn't come and it's a long drawn project, but we will look at the fact that you have put in effort towards the end goal and award you for that. I think it completely changed in the way people started taking more projects that were more long term, that had more higher risk. We also created this whole thing about how do we award failure, because at the end of it, your performance is all about manifests in rewards and recognitions, right? So do you reward failure? And in which case, then a lot of women would actually step up and say, you know, I'm going to take a much more aggressive project, even if I fail, what more? I also do a lot of mentoring for women who don't want to take on a stretch opportunity or don't want to do something different. And we sit down and draw this whole matrix. So what? Like, let's put all the different options that you have. So what? What will happen? What will happen? What will happen? And when people go through it, women mostly realize that it's not so bad to take on a risk or to jump into something else. But you again need somebody to sit down and map that for you and look at your various options, and the options don't look really bad. So that's how your ecosystems have to function to support women.
That's great. So the KPIs were basically measured on the effort in your organization, and you saw a switch in that. I know, Spoorthy, in your organization, it's more forward-facing, and you're basically everybody that that comes into interaction are really just the clients. I'm wondering. I know that, you know, obviously because of that, there's a huge area where, you know, this really doesn't even come into the picture of being able to be a, you know, a policy of some sort. And I know that this is not really the question, but when you are interacting with the women, because it's primarily a workforce, when women work together with women, do you find that there is much of an imposter syndrome there, or do you find that because it's an equal playing field, because we've understood that, you know, when they're minorities, when you're a minority in a situation, then you obviously have more of this imposter syndrome. I'm just trying to see that, you know, in your organization, which is primarily, you know, a women task force, do you see women playing on a more equal field and therefore empowered more?
Yeah, I would kind of like to believe that's the case, because we have more than 80% women workforce in the system, and naturally women don't get talked over. And I hope the minority, because the men are in the minority, and I hope they do not feel like their voices are drowned, because, you know, typically speaking, you know, women are considered to be talking a lot. But I think statistically speaking, especially, you know, from my corporate experience, I know that in the work settings, it's men who speak a lot, right? So I think as leaders, I kind of agree with what Sunita also just mentioned. We are all constantly reevaluating our appraisal systems and reevaluating our measurables. So even in our case, while it is a client interfacing retail setup, and we have targets and we work closely with you know, salon managers who have numbers to achieve, we do have you know, we do have a degree of leniency there, because it's gone are the days when you would expect people to hit 100% of their KRAs. So at 75% achievement, also people do start getting their variable bonus. So there is a room for error. There is a room for you to miss out on certain achievables, and that could be a combination of external factors and internal factors. So I think that amount of, evolution is there in the system today, including myself as a CEO. I am also not expected to meet 100% of my deliverables. If I'm there at 75%, I also get a chunk of my bonus, right? So that element is also incorporated in our system. And I think as a leader, a thing which I probably faced at some point is that, the person who's probably coming with a different academic branding or is more powerful in the organization, their ideas are not dismissed very easily. So now that is something that I have kind of, experienced. So I'm very conscious of the fact that I don't disabuse myself of that belief that somebody in a certain hierarchy can only make the right contribution to the organization. So giving a fair chance to everyone and a fair share of voice to everyone, that is something that we totally advocate in our forums. And I would like to really believe that no one really struggles to find their voice in the room. We also have, a system where our teams are actually trained across different verticals for them to understand where they're most competent in, or where do their skill sets match the best. So we have something where, if someone is a very outgoing kind of a person, can work in a very ambiguous setup, that person is then carved for a shoot stylist role. If someone is, very technically sound, has a lot of patience in dealing with people, that stylist is then trained to be an academy instructor. If someone has a flair for business, for numbers, he or she is trained to become a salon business manager. So likewise, I think, when you kind of map skill sets with the job role, you also tend to get the best out of people. And this whole feeling that I'm incompetent for what I'm kind of, marked for, you kind of minimizing that bit, in your teams.
Fantastic. I think I want to move on to our last point, and I would like it to be like just a 1 minute sort of key takeaways for people who've been sort of listening to us. And goes back to our statement of turning the imposter syndrome to a weapon. So I'd really like to know from all of you, one statement at a time, how do you turn this imposter syndrome into your weapon? I think Monisha, I'll start with you again because you mentioned this right in the beginning. One really strong tip for people who have this to begin to turn this into their weapon.
Prakriti, I'm just going to take another minute because I have to share something really important and then that last tip.
Sure.
So, according to research, there are two groups that, are mentioned with how this happens. So especially in India, and I'll give you practical examples, is that, okay, I had a client, let's call her Priya. When she was born, her family was unhappy because she was not a boy. And so she grew up being compared with her older brother. And there was always a need to prove herself in school with her grades and overperform. So part of her wanted to disprove her parents' perception, and another part of it believed the family myth. And her entire life went on in trying to kind of, prove her worth. And the second group is, a woman who was born in a family who was received a message that you're amazing, you're perfect, like whatever you do is just brilliant. And so this lady received a message, we'll call her, say, Anu. So Anu believed that, I have to be perfect all the time. And so there are some things, of course, she couldn't do well. And then she felt, okay, my parents are wrong, She's begun to distrust her parents' perception, and then thus started the imposter syndrome. So I just want to tell both these groups of women, if you are listening here, if you find yourself falling in any one of these categories, I want you to know that you are amazing just the way you are, first of all. And second is that regardless of your family dynamics, regardless of your childhood experiences. I was also born in a family where they wanted a boy, so I can connect to this. Regardless of your past, you have the power within you that voice within you that keeps questioning your skills and keeps, putting you down, you have power over that voice. And if the one thing I would say is to take control of that voice and to mentor that voice, be a parent to that voice, almost like being a parent to your inner child. And of course, therapy helps and we can help with that process. Thank you, Prakriti.
Thank you. Sunita, your bulletproof statement.
Yeah. So I so agree with everything Monisha said. It's almost like I was taking a part of her lessons. But thank you, Monisha, for that. I think mine, I spoke about it earlier, is build your cabinet, and this came from a psychologist called John Amici. He was doing a talk on imposter syndrome at Google, and he spoke about this building deep social support. And we usually do it. It could be your parents, it could be your siblings, but you also need that at work. You need to build a trusted, respectful engagement and with individuals who empower you. So don't have water cooler conversations. Don't have like 40 people that you're going to meeting and getting pepped up. Have one or two that you really trust and believe you can be psychologically safe, and listen to them and let them build your confidence. The second thing that I would say is record your success. A lot of times when your voice keeps telling you you're not good, the moment you start recording your success, and I've seen that with women that I have mentored at work, is you write about everything that you've done, where you have gotten. When you do an acute assessment of what you are doing, then you are really good at building your brand, because you're able to tell what your strength is, and that then pulls you out of this whole cycle of rut. So like Monisha very clearly mentioned, that train your inner voice and move them from the chronic self-doubt to really becoming your advocates and your coaches.
Thank you so much. I know that people tend to feed into vulnerability also. Like if you feel like in the workplace, especially, and if anybody realizes that this is somebody who's got a vulnerability, they sort of feed in. So it's really important, Sunita, what you said, which is really pick wisely. Pick really wisely who those people in your close sort of network are. Spoorthy, over to you. I know that this is the last sort of question, which is almost the same question, but in a different way. If you had a magic wand, what would you do to create a resilience in a person so that they don't have this issue ever in their lives?
Okay, I think like Monisha said, there are a lot of variables, in this whole imposter syndrome that we're talking about, and it's not just one thing. It also, your personal and professional settings also influence you a lot. So it's difficult for me to just kind of give one common denominator that would apply to all. But generically speaking, if I had a magic wand, maybe I would like the women force to believe that, the imposter syndrome or the self-doubt or the social anxiety, as we may say, it's not a fatal flaw, it's a development need, right? And that is something that I have learned to deal, with my social anxieties that I was going through as I began my career. And over a period of time, I've realized that anxiety is not such a bad thing after all. For me, it kind of gave me energy. It told me that the task on hand is important, and I would totally focus on it and not take it for granted. So for me now, it's okay to be scared, and being scared, I just tell myself that means you're doing something really, really brave. And I would really like that belief to kind of percolate in all women force, especially because I know we keep questioning our capabilities all the time.
It's true. Women are, I mean, I love how we started this as well, this whole conversation where we said, like, if women uplift women, I think, we won't have women in minorities, and maybe then, we're all on an equal playing field. And I wonder if you've noticed this in your organizations. I mean, if any of you have noticed this in your organization, where women tend to also be sort of the perpetrators of this unfortunate event. And I think that would be a great example to share if anybody's ever faced that. Of course, you don't have to take names, but
Prakriti, I can talk about, I mean, it's not women, men, but there is this whole concept of when I was researching imposter syndrome, and Google has done a lot of work here. So there is this concept of a looking glass self, which usually describes the process where an individual will base the sense of self on how others view them. So what happens is, if I'm in a group or a team for a long time, like say women usually are believed stereotyped to say that you cannot be good in sales. Men are good in sales. So if there is one single woman or two women in a group of like 15 sales guys, and they're constantly looking down on the women start actually believing. So that's the looking glass self. They actually start believing that they're not good enough. So one of the things that I learned through this process is whenever you get into the situation where there is a constant voice coming, because you tend to base your sense in terms of what others believe about you, you need to get out of the toxic environment. And sometimes people stay in toxic environment for so long that it pulls them down, and the damage is quite a lot to bring back, and then you need clinical help to get out of it because of the anxiety. So my recommendation is be conscious, like you're working on it, but if you feel that the environment is adding to it, get out of that environment and move into something else which gives value.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I mean, get out of that environment. This is, sort of self-empowerment, and most people, and most people don't actually do that for themselves because of the fear. And I think, Monisha, you can talk a little bit more about like the kind of fears that keep people in these toxic sort of relationships, whether it be the workplace, and people. And we haven't touched upon this because you guys are quite senior in your positions, but there are people who are in companies with toxic bosses, and those bosses have imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome, when a boss has an imposter syndrome, they don't let you rise because of their own fear of failure and their own fear of being small, right? And we really haven't talked about that, but that's also a really important point, because we know that people who are listening in are running companies as well, are also CEOs, and if they recognize this, there must be some kind of, I mean, I know what it is, but I'd love you to share the kind of personality traits that come out in the workplace that inhibit the growth of other people because they're harboring this imposter syndrome, which becomes extremely toxic.
Yeah. So, according to research in psychology, the imposter syndrome is different in how it plays out for men, and it's different in how it plays out for women. In general, more women experience it than men, according to research, largely because of societal expectations and gender stereotyping in most societies. Now, when it comes to men, if men experience failure, in general, they attribute it to luck or some external factor, which is quite the opposite for women. When women experience success, they attribute it to a luck or an external factor. In the case of imposter syndrome, so we have to realize that the internal locus of control is quite different for men and women, largely because of how we're nurtured and raised. This is according to research. Now, coming to your second question about the fear that a lot of people face and experiencing toxic bosses, toxic spouses, toxic parents, toxic children, any toxic relationship. There is there is a role we can play, and for the person who's going through imposter syndrome, the one thing I'd like to let this person know is if they can change their locus of control, which is external currently for them, if they can just change that as an internal locus of control, then they can feel like they have more power and more control and more change in any of these relationships. So you can have a pathetic boss, you can have a pathetic spouse, you can have a pathetic parent, but you can still have an amazing life. You can still have a brilliant life. And if you can only take that locus of control from external to internal, then that would be huge. Then it doesn't matter how other people are. You can make choices for yourself. You will feel more empowered. You will know what the right thing to do is, and you won't keep doubting yourself. The most important thing is you'll start trusting yourself. You will distrust other people's perception of you and start trusting your perception of yourself more. And the last thing I'd like to say is that uh, especially to high achieving women who are going through the imposter syndrome, is if you can remove this voice, at least for a moment, for a brief moment, then enjoy your success, enjoy whatever you've created. In fact, your imposter syndrome has given you this beautiful life that you have, is given you all this success that you have. Without the syndrome, you may not have been this hardworking, this competent. This need to prove yourself has created all this success. So if you can only remove this voice that doubts it and doesn't let you enjoy it, just go and enjoy what you have. So that these are ways you can actually make this as your weapon.
Thank you. I mean, it's clear that it doesn't matter whether it's whether it's positive or negative, because we, at the end of the day, we always have control over how we want to respond to it and how we want to build it out. And I think that really brings us to our last question. And I know that if you feel like after you've gone through all this sort of conversation with us that you have the imposter syndrome and you didn't know and you didn't recognize that you had it, I mean, don't feel afraid, because there were some fantastic women like Michelle Obama, etc., who have the same syndrome, and they've managed to sort of do a lot with their life. I mean, there's a Maya Angelou, who's a Canadian author, and I mean, I love her work, and she has this, and but they all live with unfortunately, you can live with mental health challenges and concerns, and still live a fantastic life, and as long as you, and this is a great thing, I think Spoorthy, you've showcased also while you've been talking, that there's been a massive amount of introspection just in the way in which you all actually have lived. And you just share a little bit, because I know Monisha has talked about, and you can do this, but you've done that as well. So can you share a little bit about, the time that you spent investigating this to reframe the voice in your head, which is just internal, and it's your conversation with yourself?
Like, just to extend what Monisha said, the moment I stopped externalizing, if I may call it an illness, the moment I stopped externalizing it, and I took ownership of this problem, saying that, okay, I have a fear, let's say I have social anxiety, I have a fear to speak in a public forum. I started putting myself more and more in that awkward situation, in that situation which would scare me. And the more and more I exposed myself to that situation, I realized that actually with every challenge that I crossed, I felt like I've become a little more wiser and stronger and more prepared for what's lying ahead for me. So, just to say that it's not again about men and women. In a room full of people, there are going to be some who are going to inspire you, and there are going to be some who are going to intimidate you. And the deciding factor is not them, it's your level of security. So work on building your confidence muscle. And that is exactly what I would urge, anyone who's going through this. And I think while a lot of people will not acknowledge it, I think this is quite common. It's there for all. And it's just that the degree may vary in a person. It may be more dialed up in me. It may be less dialed up in somebody else. But at the end of the day, it is you who have to, work on it with a lot of patience and strategy. And it's not something which overnight you can just overcome. You have to be patient with it, and you have to deal with the situation with a lot of mindfulness. I think that is more critical there.
Yeah, thank you so much. So contemplation, I suppose, is one great skill. Observation of your thoughts, using meditation and mindfulness, as you're saying, is a great avenue to really think about this. And, understand that, stats show that 7 in 10 people go through this. I mean, 7 in 10 is a very high number. And if you're looking at a total number, 66% of women go through this. But men, 50% of men go through this as well. So it's not only women, and there are a large number of people that are now, unfortunately, faced with mental health triggers, and this is one of the things that has become really high, because you can actually live with it, and people don't recognize it, but it's creating trauma within yourself a lot of the times. Something that I found that always helps is really, and because I'm a therapist with using hypnotherapy and regression therapy and NLP, creative visualization of who you are, and just putting that out there as a forward pace to what you want to accomplish is so important. I think you're just recognizing that you are your strength. In fact, while I'm talking about this, I kind of feel like I'm going through this in one of the consultancy practices that I work with, and it almost feels like we've got all these sort of PhDs around, and I'm thinking, okay, listen, I'm an advocate in mental health, and there are all these PhDs around. One second, what is it that they're going to gain from me? And then I realize that, being a generalist, you actually have a larger view on what's happening. And you can actually therefore then lead, because you can give prescriptive, direction to people who have the PhDs, right? But it isn't something that we think about. Go tying into what Spoorthy was talking about as well. It isn't something that we think about because we in India, especially, by the way, this is an Indian phenomenon. Education is so forcefully harped on that we forget that happiness is actually number one. And I wish to anybody who's here who have children. I have 3 children. I'm sure all of us have children. Let's focus on keeping them happy, because as you know, with what Monisha's been saying and with what Sunita also said, it starts in childhood, early stage development, how you're treated at home, how you're made to feel about yourself. And that, my friends, carries on. And no matter how much inner child work you do, you have to find the peace within yourself. So let's stop creating the disharmony and just really own the harmony within our own families and within the environment that we lead. Thank you so much, ladies, for this amazing conversation.